Welcome back to Dear Electronics. It's been a decent amount of time since I've posted, so I figured I'd give an update video talking about where I've been, the future in terms of this channel, and why I stopped posting for a bit. So the background footage that you're currently seeing is of a current PCB that I'm in the process of designing right now. I filmed some footage just doing some of the calculations in an Excel spreadsheet. Some of these calculations are incorrect, like the duty cycle, which I messed up because Excel is very finicky in terms of how you use your parentheses when making formulas. So it was more or less just a first draft, trying to get all of the different formulas that I needed on one spreadsheet with the values that I was working with. So this PCB is mostly finished. I just need to redo certain sections of the layout as I change some of the parts over. So this footage is fairly old in that sense that a lot has changed since I've started the project, but I just wanted to include something that was relevant to this channel instead of putting random background footage. So that's what you're seeing here. But I mainly wanted to make this video to talk about where I've been. The last video I made was in February of 2025, going over the breadboard adjustable power supply. I made a two-part series. The first part focused more so on the schematic, and the second was on the layout and some testing with an oscilloscope. However, the second part didn't really include testing the PCB under a load. And I mentioned in the video how I didn't really have an electronic load or resistors that had a high enough power dissipation to be able to handle 2 to 3 watts of dissipation, depending on the voltage and current in the circuit. But what I am going to do is I'm going to upload a part 3 where I do just that, and I test the board and I show the switching node without a load and with the load, because I thought something was wrong with my PCB at the time when I probed the switching node and it looked terrible, but I didn't realize that in order for a boost converter to properly perform with its switching node, you need to test it under load. So that's something that I learned, and I'm going to be covering that and some other issues that came up when trying to test the circuit. So that video will be posted soon. I also wanted to cover just kind of my thought process on where I want to take this channel, because for a while I was going back and forth deciding whether or not I wanted to focus more on firmware and embedded systems or more on analog electronics. I've always been better at analog electronics and digital electronics with very minimal programming. My studies involved electrical engineering. I did take one coding class, and I did some coding in Python and a little bit of embedded experience as seen on this channel, but my bread and butter has always been analog electronics or power electronics, which is what I tend to focus on with a lot of the PCBs that I make. But I feel in order to reach a solid baseline, I think it's best if I have some projects purely focused on analog or digital electronics without programming, and others where there's some programming involved, but it's not always the forefront. So in terms of stuff that I want to show in the future for this channel, the project that I'm working on right now is a dual polarity power supply. It's going to be able to output plus or minus 20 volts with a load current of up to an amp, if not a little bit more, based on the parts that I selected. But I want to make this so I can get into audio amplifiers. I think it would be pretty cool to make a Class A amplifier, A, B, C, and a Class D amplifier, and make this with a bunch of transistors and all sorts of other circuitry that's involved. It would be a great learning experience and something that I've always kind of been interested in. So this is the first major project that I would like to show, alongside making a custom electronic load where firmware would be needed. I could put in a little display, program an STM32, show how much voltage is currently being regulated or read, and then the amount of current that's going to be drawn from the shunt resistor. So ideally, I would like to show that on the channel as well and show my thought process behind it. So a project like that would involve some firmware, whereas the projects that I'm working on right now and what you see in the background footage is just purely analog electronics. There's no firmware or programming that's involved. So I think establishing a good middle ground for that is best, because if you can design circuits and program, you're in a good spot. So ideally, that's something that I would like to try and do on this channel. And I would definitely like to post more if possible. It's challenging, to say the least, as I want to make these videos as good as I can and hopefully inspire others to create their own projects and experiment and see just how far they can take, their own understanding of whatever subject it is that they're trying to get better at. I don't claim to be an expert in electrical engineering or electronics. I'm just someone who's trying to learn by doing things, by creating stuff, and becoming better as a result of that process. So, I always try and make sure that whatever mistakes I end up making, I correct them, and, I do my best to improve and make sure not to make the same mistake again. So, that's ultimately the goal of this channel. And I feel like for the most part, I've done a decent job at doing that. I just, again, haven't been too consistent in terms of when I'm going to post and how often I post. And it's a bit hard to answer that kind of question. Ideally, I would like to make a video at least once a month, as I feel that's the best schedule. And once a month gives me enough time to research a topic, design the circuit, and then record and edit a video. However, this is not always the case. Like with my dual polarity power supply, it's something that I've been working on for about 2 months now, almost 3. I have a career outside of this channel. I don't ever plan on making this a full-time job. This is more or less just a hobby for me. But I still want to improve my content, even if I can't follow a strict or more routine type of upload schedule. So for example, for the dual polarity power supply, I want to make a video first going over exactly what I want to accomplish with the project. I want to go over the different type of topologies that you could use in order to make something like this, the pros and cons with each. Then I want to go over some specific ICs in those different kind of topologies and talk about the trade-offs. Then from there, I'll talk about the parts that I selected and why I'm using them, and again, the pros and cons of that. And finally, then I could finish off with an in-depth review of the schematic, go over the layout, data sheets, calculations, and then do a test with my oscilloscope and an electronic load with a light, medium, and heavy load. So I think content like that would definitely be very beneficial. And then from there, I wanted to make an electronic load. So that would involve some firmware with STM32s, as I want to use a display for that to see how much current is currently being outputted across the shunt resistor. And I want it to be adjustable, because right now I have an electronic load, but it's just basically a perf board with 4 resistors in parallel. So it's not adjustable. Resistors can change, due to their temperature and tolerance and how much load is being applied to them. So it's not super accurate. And there's also a lot of power being dissipated. Whereas with an electronic load, if you set it up correctly, the power dissipation can actually be pretty low, even at high currents. So I'll get into that, further into another video. But like I said, I do have a plan for this channel. It's just going to take some time. And, admittedly, I took a lot of time off too, because other things outside of this got very busy, and I just didn't really know what to post. I wasn't really working on projects for a time, and there was a project that I was going to show initially, but now that's just going to be one of the topologies that I didn't end up using for my dual polarity power supply. So you'll see more of this as content, comes along. But, for the people who have stuck around, thank you. I know I have quite a small audience, but I want to make sure that people are engaged and involved, and if anyone has any suggestions or topic ideas or maybe something I didn't understand, feel free to drop a comment below and let me know. I won't do a typical outro for this, as this is not a usual video that I post, but more content will come in 2026. So thank you all, and have a great day.